Make it more like Netflix was the feedback we received. I don't know if you've ever received feedback a bit like that. It's specific, it's measurable, it's actionable. Up there with just make it better. For us, this is one of those hard ones. Oh, just be a little bit more like the market leader whose pockets are 10 times as deep as yours. They don't have to front up to Senate estimates on a quarterly basis and explain their actions to the government. Just be like them. But it was the goal that we were given, and it's what we had to work with. So my tale today is what it's been like being on the inside of a traditional, somewhat risk-adverse organization. The lessons that I've learned as a product leader, and hopefully you will take away a few tips and tricks if you find you're up against it, trying to drive change in your organization, when you realize that your goal is make it more like Netflix. Oh, but at the same time, don't be too much like Netflix. So a bit about me. My name is Steph Saad. I am a senior group product manager at the ABC. Our digital product department in the ABC is about 250 odd people, and I head up a team of about 25 or so product managers in that 250 odd people. As Jetty said, I'm a mum of two feisty little women, my second job. And I am based in Wollongong, New South Wales, which is just a city just south of Sydney. You can see the city of Wollongong in the background of this particular photo. And I live in the foothills of this mountain, Mount Kira. This is a special women's mountain on the land of the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. In the dreamtime, a girl, Gira, was mourning the loss of her 5 sisters, and she sat in this very spot for so long that she turned to stone, became covered in moss and leaves, and became now what we know as Mount Kira. I'm really honoured to live in this mountain's shadow, and I'm also really honoured to be here today, and I would like to acknowledge and thank the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge all the traditional custodians of the lands where we all live, work and play, and I'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So before I embark on this somewhat of a cautionary tale, I need to set the scene for you, set the context. Who is the ABC? So the ABC, if you don't know, is Australia's national broadcaster. We were founded in 1932 with just a single radio station. We've now grown to a plethora of radio, TV channels, a whole raft of digital touch points, everything that you probably are aware of: news, listen, iView, kids content, Triple J, you name it. We're a publicly funded organisation, and our mission is to inform, educate and entertain all Australians, and to share Australian perspectives and culture with the world. This 90 plus year history is one that is really steeped in tradition, and it's really steeped in very strong editorial values of independence, impartiality and objectivity. This mission or goal is for the organisation can present a bit of a challenge for us as product managers, because in this case our target audience is literally everyone. And in the past, this infinitely broad target audience wouldn't have been a challenge. Broadcast, your average TV and radio, was just the main mode of consumption for all ABC audiences. But we've actually seen a massive decline in that in the last 5-10 years. So where we once had really large audiences consuming our content on TV and radio, that has declined significantly. And in fact, it was last year, we've reached an inflection point. We now have more audiences consuming ABC content on our digital touchpoints than we do on our broadcast mediums. So if you combine that with the fact that these digital first platforms, the Netflixes, the Spotifys, etc., they've changed the game. And not only have they changed the game, they've actually reset audience expectations of what it's like to interact with a digital touch point. They now expect when I land there, that service is tailored to me. So not only has the ABC had to partake in this digital transformation from broadcast to digital, but we've also had to completely transform or reset the way we think about harnessing our superpowers. Those strong editorial values that I spoke to, we've had to rethink about how we harness that. So the story that I'm going to take you on today is not one about, well, why should you personalize or should you do it? Because if you're not already thinking that you need to tailor your product, then you've probably, missed the boat. But this is more about the bumpy journey of what it's been like on the inside in trying to drive this change. So enter our protagonist, if you will, ABC iView. This is ABC's video-on-demand platform, more than 15 years old. You see the little trip through time there. We were Australia's first video-on-demand product, Australia's first video-on-demand service, way before the Netflix, etc. Back when these services were called catch-up services, and everybody named their product, followed Apple's trend, called it something. We just never let that go. But since that moment of launching ABC Playback, is what it was called back in 2008, we have now become the number one reaching broadcast video on demand, important qualifier there, number one reaching BVOD service. And we now exist across quite a complex ecosystem of TV, web, and apps. Now, we've been on this journey to create a more tailored service, more personalized service, since we introduced mandatory login on iView back in 2022. But despite delivering a raft of personalized features and functionality, algorithmic recommendations, watch lists, you name it, we were still receiving a lot of feedback. So if it wasn't, just make it more like Netflix, it was this. Why am I seeing Bluey on my homepage? Now, you may be familiar with this show, especially if you have kids. This is only the number one show that's ever been on iView in the history of the entire service. But if you don't have kids, and this is the first thing you see when you land on our service, not particularly relevant. So the qual data was telling us something was off, and the quant data was telling us the same thing. If you look at the iView homepage, 25, 30 odd rails of content long, 70% of audiences were not scrolling past the first 5 rails. So that tells us very clearly that top of the homepage, prime real estate, we need to make sure that is giving audiences the biggest bang for buck. Zoom in on what we call the homepage carousel, the very first rail that you see, big promotional space. 9 out of 10 people hitting that page were not clicking on anything in that rail. Just want to emphasize that 90% of people that hit the page didn't click anything. And then our own research, our own qual research was telling us that 18 to 39-year-olds, who are a demographic that the ABC traditionally underperforms with, they were telling us that they expect their digital services to be personalized by default. I log in, I land there, the service should be tailored to me. So for us, the data was clear. The market and industry patterns were clear. We needed to make that homepage carousel work harder and be more relevant to more people. So what's the most obvious way for us to scale that? Algorithmic recommendations were the key. There should be no debate here. It seems really obvious. We were very wrong. There was a lot of debate. So we could not get our content partners within the organization, our content stakeholders, to agree. We couldn't get permission to run an A/B test. We couldn't get permission to test with 20, 10, even 5% of our audience. There was a strong rhetoric. What if the recommendations recommend the wrong thing? How do I know what it's going to recommend? And kind of inherent in algorithmic recommendations, if they're tailored, you kind of don't know what it's going to recommend. But also, a big one, I don't understand how it works. Now, we were blocked for months, literally months, in getting anything up. And it really felt like in a traditional risk-averse organization, this was just one of those moments. Same old ABC, being, fear of change, etc. However, we needed to stop, put a bit of a product mindset on, and try and truly understand the resistance. What became really apparent to us was there was a very real fear in the organization that algorithms would make people redundant. If you think about, if you're a part of a content team, an editorial team, your job is about making editorial choices about the kind of content that will appeal to audiences. You then need to get that commissioned, you need to get it made, and then bloody hell, you want to get that thing promoted because I've just spent all this money on it. And the ABC really prides itself on its editorial judgment, its editorial oversight, and they have very human skills. We as a product team had not taken our partners on the journey to truly understand, so that they could truly understand how their efforts could be scaled through the use of and the support of recommendations. Combine that with the fact that the tech itself was a bit of a black box. So as I said, our teams didn't understand how it worked, and to be quite frank, we in product kind of struggled to explain it. And we just assumed that people would trust us. But completely incorrect assumption. That led to months and months of delay of trying anything on the product because we hadn't earned that trust. We did finally get an experiment up. However, that was only through escalation all the way to the top dog and getting someone to make the top-down decision. Not ideal. But as I said, after about 6 months, we finally went live. We were using a one-to-one recommendations method where we were delivering personalized, popular content based on the genres of content that you were interacting with. And the results were actually phenomenal. Straight out of the gate, we saw a 50% increase in the daily users pressing play on that homepage carousel. 50% increase straight out of the gate. Overall, over time, we actually doubled the conversion rate of that homepage carousel. And we were also showing 7 times more unique content in that space than is possible through human curation alone. So we were clearly hitting the mark from a product perspective. We were delivering on business results and our audience was clearly loving it. However, a new rhetoric settled in. We were seeing that certain programs just weren't hitting the play targets that had been set for them. So clearly it was the algorithm's fault. The algorithm is disadvantaging Australian content. The algorithm is disadvantaging news content. And then the third one, which really tipped us over the edge, was why is the algorithm promoting ER? Now, ER, if you're familiar with that show, they launched the career of George Clooney. There's some awesome haircuts and wide ties in that show. Nostalgic viewing. We bought it as a back catalogue number just to, increase volume of content. But people love it. People love it. And the more they watched it, the more the algorithm recommended it. We as a product team actually then spent hours, days, weeks even, doing deep data analysis to try and disprove this commentary. The algorithm doesn't disadvantage Australian content. It doesn't disadvantage news content. Yes, it was promoting ER, but the fact that it was a huge emotional and time suck on all of us. It wasn't until one pretty much an incredulous team member just went, well, bloody hell, if a doubling of conversion rate is not success, then what the hell is? Bit of a penny drop moment for us, a mic drop moment, if you will. In all of this time, trying to push forward, convince people with their data, with the data that we had, in all the debate leading up to this moment, we hadn't actually stopped to align on what does success look like. There was 2 really clear but opposing goals. So us in product, we had really clear data that we needed to make the most out of that homepage carousel. We needed to convert as many people to play in that placement as possible. Yet on the content side of the fence, they had a goal that was, well, we need to promote key Australian titles, and we need those titles to hit very specific play targets. We had been running on an assumption that our goals were actually identical when in fact they weren't. It seems really obvious in retrospect. It's kind of embarrassing to be saying it out loud. It's kind of product management 101 sort of stuff. But all that frustration of trying to push forward, we had, in a traditional organization, we had forgotten the basics. We needed to have started with a goal alignment and work from there. So, bit of a personal one, this lesson. So, in this moment of non-alignment, we had to really stop and take stock. We could keep fighting the uphill battle, or we needed to take a different approach. We have since acknowledged that we need to be more aware, do a better job of including editorial priorities into our algorithmic recommendations. And we have since made the call to remove the algorithmic recommendations from that top placement whilst we work through this with our content partners. As a product leader, this one really hurt. We'd fought really hard to convince our stakeholders to take a particular direction. We had fought really hard to convince them with data, both quant and qual, and the results of that experiment were actually really positive, and we could clearly drive business results through that. However, we had not aligned on goals up front. We'd lost trust early on, and we couldn't iterate our way out of that one. We were investing so much energy in that conversation. And I personally felt like I had failed my team. I'd failed the organization because I had not done the really obvious things early on. However, this is not the first time a decision hasn't gone my way, and it won't be the last. If you really want to survive or lead in any organization, let alone a traditional and risk-averse one at that, you actually are going to need to practice your personal resilience. There's this quote by Churchill, which I really liked. It sort of really felt like it reflected what I was going through at the time. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. We as product people, we work in a space where failure isn't just likely. It's actually necessary. Whether that is a launch that didn't land, maybe the product that you thought was going to be amazing, maybe it just flopped, or in my case, it was just a whole series of incorrect assumptions. But what is going to matter is showing up the next day, absorbing those lessons, and continuing on, because that's going to be where the growth happens. It's not in the win, it's in dusting yourself off after the fall. So if there was things that you could take away with you today, I think, if you find yourself up against it in an organization trying to push through with change, what are some of the things that you can take away? So firstly, just remember that innovation itself isn't just about the tech. So in our case, this was about recommendations and personalization, but maybe it's AI, maybe it's something else in your organization. But those things are just tools. Innovation can only flourish when you have earned the trust within your organization. You can't just plug in a piece of tech or an algorithm or whatever it might be and just expect that the organization will follow you. Real traction only happens when you can take your whole organization on that journey with you. For us, it was really clear in the end that personalization meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and actually had some very, intensely personal connotations for some. Progress only happened for us when we actually realized we needed to define those things together with our partners and align on what success looked like and why it mattered. And ultimately, you actually don't need to choose, in our case, between the algorithm and curation, between tech and the human things. The magic happens when product and tech and editorial or the human side of your organization work hand in glove. Sometimes the best experience is going to be a purely data-driven one. And sometimes, like for the ABC, in moments of national importance, whether that is a flood or a war or an election, it's when people turn to the ABC. And that's when the ABC really comes into its own. And those moments are deeply human. So now our strategy for our products and in relation to personalization is deeply rooted in both of these things working together. So in summation, if I can wrap up now, personalization at the ABC isn't just about chasing clicks. It is a tool that we can use to help Australians both discover the content that they want to know, but also the content that we as the ABC know they need to know. So it is about both relevance to the individual audience member, but also about our responsibility as an organisation to inform, educate, and entertain them. So it's only been through this process that we can maybe have our cake and eat it too, for our goal of being A bit like Netflix, but also not too much like Netflix. Thank you.